Hello, my name is Christopher Runstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Runstrom Astrology. And I want to welcome all of you to this special live episode that we are doing where you have sent in questions regarding the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and I'm going to do the best job that I can to answer them. Before I do, I hope you have all gotten a chance to watch the episode dealing with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, based or integrating into that episode the story from the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It was a great deal of fun to make, and I have Joe G, my producer, and his amazing production team to thank for what I think is really a special, splendid episode. Actually, let's make it a splendid episode, and I hope that you have all had an opportunity to watch that. We're pretty proud of that one over here. Now, when we're dealing with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's a very rare conjunction because these two planets move so slowly in the sky. Saturn will take 28 years to go through all 12 zodiac signs, and Neptune, I can't think of the amount of years it takes to go through all 12 signs off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is the Neptune will be in a zodiac sign from anywhere from 13 to 14 years. And so for these planets to align just right, like in a conjunction plus at 0 degrees Aries, is a very special and unique event. Actually, it's a spectacular event, and it's one that promises to have a very powerful influence in the days and really the months, perhaps even years to come. So what are we dealing with here? Before I dive on into the questions that we received, and I want to thank all of you for sending in your questions. They were so wonderful, and there were so many, so I was only able to choose 5, but I want to thank all of you for sending in these questions. I love all of you guys out there. You ask such wonderful questions, and if you're not asking a question, you have these wonderful comments and observations, and I count myself very fortunate to have an audience like you. So basically, a Saturn-Neptune conjunction is when two planets are in the same place at the same time in the sky. And so we've got this idea of Neptune being the planet of illusion, and then we have Saturn being the planet of, well, to get right to the point, reality checks. Okay, so when you have the two of the planets there together at the same time, and it's a conjunction, it's not a struggle in the sense of like a square, but the planets are acting upon one another. The best way to think of a conjunction between two planets is as a three-legged race. You might remember that from childhood, where you and someone else, your legs are tied to one another, and as are the other participants in this race, and then you go rushing forward, and some people are really good at it. They leap and race forward, and other people fall over themselves, and hilarity ensues, and all these sorts of things. But this is the way to think of a conjunction in astrology. And I think perhaps the best way to illustrate how this works is to go ahead and jump right on into the questions. So our first question is, I don't know, Joe, I feel like I should call you like Mr. Music, or I don't know, Mr. Cosmic. Okay, our first question comes from Ilmara 3. She says, I have my sun at 29 degrees Pisces in my 11th or 12th house, depending on the house system used. I would love to know what the Saturn-Neptune conjunction on my sun would be like. In astrology, we have something which is called a house system. We work with a circle, that's the chart, and then the houses you can almost think of as being slices in a pizza or spaces on a game board. We have 12 of them, and each house rules over a particular area of life. We also have something called a house system, where you might have a chart cast in the Placidus house system style, or a whole sign house style, or an equal house style, and there's all these different styles. And honestly, I don't think one is any better than the other. We just have different house systems. And so hence that's why the Elmara 3 is asking, I have this in either the 11th or the 12th house. So what I'm going to do is describe quickly what that conjunction would be like in the different houses because it's going to be very different. Okay, the 11th house is pretty much the house of, let's say, friends in high places. It's the house of sponsors. It's the house where you are met by people who are helping you to get higher in your life. And the reason they're doing this is because the sun in the 11th house is heading towards the 12 noon point. And so it's aspirational. It's climbing in the sky and it is seen and it is recognized. And so what this can bring is recognition of people who are like, hey, you're really funny. You should be a stand-up comic. Or, hey, that's a great tune that you're humming. You should be a songwriter. Okay, they're recognizing you some sort of talent or potential, and they might want to champion you in some way. They might want to foster that growth. And so what can happen here is that you can enter into these sorts of sponsorships or mentorships, and these can be very wonderful. These can be constructive. These can be very helpful. You learn a lot, and the person who's mentoring or sponsoring you is also experiencing the joy of helping to educate, enlighten, and to guide. So when you have a Saturn and a Neptune conjunction here in the 11th house, there might be this feeling of a disillusionment with this person. Okay, as I was saying before, Neptune is the planet of illusion. It's basically a planet that puts everything in a rosy glow of positivity, especially in the zodiac sign of Aries. And then Saturn is the planet of the reality check. So this might be a period of time when there's a reality check that takes place with this figure in your life. And you're wondering, is this such a good idea or not? And then there's another way that we can interpret it, is that you might also have reached a point in your life where you have outgrown this person's patronage or their sponsorship. So because the conjunction is taking place in Aries, a very independent-minded zodiac sign, you may be feeling right now like, I can stand on my own 2 feet. Like, I don't need a patron. I don't need a sponsor. This is something that I want to do on my own. And if you're working with a teacher, a patron, or sponsor, who encourages that, who's like, I have taught you everything that there is for me to teach you, and they're encouraging you in that regard, that can be a wonderfully positive and constructive thing. If you're not, if they're kind of like, listen, you little runt, this is the thanks I get for having helped you, grow as a person. Okay, that might be issues that come up during this period of time as well. But what's going on here is this idea of you being able to stand on your own 2 feet. And you might be feeling like, I'm ready to stand on my own 2 feet. And this can be a good thing, but it can also be a little bit of an anxiety producing thing, because it's like, wow, I'm really on my own here. But that's something where the energy of the zodiac sign of Aries becomes very helpful, because Aries is like, yeah, let's stand on our own 2 feet. So this can be a tremendously positive expression of the conjunction. Now, if it's in the 12th house, that's going to be a bit different, okay? Because the 12th house is the house where Saturn rejoices. If you work with the planetary joys, then you would know that Saturn rejoices in the 12th house. And there's an open question as to what that means. Does Saturn rejoice in the 12th house, which can be the house of self-undoing and hidden enemies? Does Saturn rejoice in this house because it rejoices in tormenting you? Or does Saturn rejoice in the 12th house because of the soulful nature of the 12th house? The 12th house can be connected to things like self-undoing and self-sabotage, those sorts of things. But the 12th house was also very famous in astrology for spiritual retreats, for turning your back on the world and really pursuing a more soulful path in your life, something that might be more isolated or on your own. And the idea of being on your own, again, is very much an Aries idea. What you want to watch out for, though, is that if you are experiencing Saturn as a more tormenting type of figure, it's going to be especially harsh because of its placement in Aries. Aries is Mars ruled. So what this can perhaps lead to is self-recrimination or self-criticism to the point where it can get nasty, or it can be very immobilizing. And so this is something that Saturn might do on its own in this particular placement. It might be like, I should have realized that, or I was stupid, or I should have been able to answer that question, and you're so dumb, and the ways that we can berate ourselves. All right, but with Neptune dissolving the energy of Saturn, Neptune sort of extends a compassion here. And so the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the 12th house might be that voice that says to you, you know, the self-recrimination is really a bad idea. I mean, like, it's bad enough that you had to deal with something that you don't feel great about, but to beat yourself up, to get down on yourself in addition to that, that's making it worse, and no good will come of it. And so it might also afford you the ability to sort of recognize those self-defeating patterns or those self-critical patterns and be able to sort of put them on the shelf, you know, with conviction, you know, be able to say, this is not helping me and I really have to let this go. And that maybe people that I think are judging me might actually be trying to help me to be a better person. And if I put aside the defensiveness and the self-recrimination, I might be open to it. So those are two interpretations that I would offer for those two particular houses. Mr. Cosmic, can we go to question number 2? Question number 2 comes from Helen Patterson, 3858. And Helen is curious as to how the Neptune-Saturn conjunction transit might affect a natal Libra-Saturn retrograde, okay, at 1 degrees. So in other words, when the transit, just like mass transit, you take a bus to get someplace or a train, okay, that's different from a natal placement, which means that's the planet that was above you and in your chart. Your natal chart is like a screenshot of the sky at the time that you were born, and so that's a planet that you live with through your life. So when you have this opposition that's taking place, it's a fascinating opposition actually, because Saturn is exalted, meaning most celebrated, in the zodiac sign of Libra, and then Saturn is in its fall. Fall is always going to be opposite an exaltation. Saturn is in its fall in the zodiac sign of Aries. So what happens here is that Saturn in Libra is going to insist on making sacrifices to make a relationship work. Okay, that could be like a personal love relationship, or it could be a business relationship, or a creative collaboration. What Saturn in Libra says is like, the relationship comes first. The relationship is the higher priority, and you need to do what it takes to make that relationship work. Another thing that Saturn and Libra can do, especially retrograde, is test potential partners. Okay, like, is this partner good enough for me? And sometimes if Saturn's given too much license, it can just keep on testing. And the partner might pass one test, but then they're on test number 7, 13, number 142. You know, Saturn in Libra has a tendency to keep on testing. There's that side to it. And of course, the whole point is you want the person to pass the test, okay, not come up with new tests. But anyway, what we have here with an opposition is that this might introduce strain or tension. This might introduce strain and stress. Let's go right for the word. All right. This might introduce strain and stress in a partnership. It could be business, amour, etc. And where you're feeling very apart from that person. And what does that do? That might lead you to be like, okay, this is a break. We need to separate, and oppositions can be associated with those separations, or separations taking place in your life. But an opposition also gives you the opportunity to examine something. Okay, when a planet is opposite your own planet, all right, it's as far away on the zodiacal wheel as it can be, so you can actually see that planet and how it works. The Saturn opposition brings awareness and a consciousness. So you might be at a point in your life right now where it's like, okay, I'm ready to make this break because it's not doing it for me. Or you might be at a point in your life where you're like, you know what, I'm ready to go forward with the relationship and not just do all this testing. So there's an examination of the patterns, the behavior patterns that are natural to the chart. Consciousness is only raised through questioning and questing. It's not raised through things coming to you habitually. Okay, so that's what the opposition can offer as a possibility. And so this might be a time of realization, because the Saturn is working with the Neptune to reveal, to disintegrate that illusion. And here in this case, that might be illusions that are had about relationships, either why I've been struggling with a relationship that I don't want to be in, or why I have kept myself out of a relationship and now, I see myself moving forward. So an opposition has the potential to bring that. The wonderful thing is that it's not a true opposition, because you have transiting Pluto in Aquarius, and Uranus enters Gemini at the end of April, and they will form sextiles. So what could be kind of like a hard break, like, when they karate chop a piece of wood in half and they're like, oh, which would be an opposition. Because of the transiting sextiles, this moves gently to bring the realization. And this opens up a variety of options and variables that might not have been there before. So this is a time of recognition, but then the great question is, how do I integrate that into my life? And this is why I love sextiles so much, especially transiting sextiles, because they help you to find a way to integrate that into your life so that it serves you in a much more constructive, and I would even go so far as to say healthy manner. Mr. Cosmos, question number 3. At EGC 111. What do you say for those of us born with Saturn in the early degrees of Aries? I'm going through my first Saturn return, and there's a whole, yes, I would imagine a whole other layer added with Neptune there. Okay, let's first talk about what a Saturn return is. Okay, Saturn, we know in astrology, is the planet of tests, trials, and tribulations. But let's just stop with tests, okay? Saturn tests you, and Saturn tests you oftentimes by withholding easy access to things that came easily to you before in your life, okay? Or by introducing a burden or a heavy responsibility that feels like it's bigger than you could possibly carry. Every 7 years, Saturn forms an aspect to itself by square opposition. So you could almost think of every 7 years you have a midterm, okay? And that's your Saturn square opposition, or a Saturn closing square coming back to the conjunction. Saturn, as I mentioned before, takes 28 to 30 years to go through all 12 signs of the zodiac. So on your 28th or 30th year, you go through what is called a Saturn return. A Saturn return is basically a rite of passage. The big question with the Saturn return essentially is, what am I going to be when I grow up? All right, that's the big Saturn return question. And they can be difficult because they Saturn kind of uproots the things that came naturally to us that we understood, and maybe the old answers don't work in the way that they used to. This is going to be compounded by the Neptune conjunction. Okay, so where Saturn is sort of showing you, Saturn would naturally in a Saturn return show you what you've outgrown, in order to be the thing to be the person you want to be when you grow up. You have to leave your childish things behind. You have to leave behind ideas or notions that you had when you were younger, as you face kind of the adult world, which is the Saturn return, to put it bluntly. Okay, with Neptune also conjunct that Saturn return, Neptune can add to or compound the disillusionment, the feeling that, I don't know what I'm doing, or these things really aren't working, and maybe I feel helpless or even hopeless as a result. What Neptune is trying to do is deepen you. Okay. Neptune isn't just like, I'm illusory, that's it. Neptune is, we fall in love with something, in love, we are infatuated, we fall into the spell. It can be a person or an aspiration or a vision of what we want to become. And that is a constructive thing that leads us, out of fixed and set ways into something that's bigger and deeper and more profound. But along the way, we can experience disillusionment with that. And then this is kind of how Saturn dovetails. Saturn is then, well, what are you going to do with that disillusionment? Are you going to say, I'm disillusioned and jaded and that's it? Or are you going to go deeper? What has been taken away? Because whatever's been taken away has left an empty space. And that is basically your access to profundity, to something that's more profound, a more profound experience. So this might materialize in one of two ways, or maybe even both. One might be this kind of feeling like, I feel like everything is overwhelming in my life. And the other thing might be, well, I'm going to go back to what felt secure. This transit this Saturn return is taking place with Saturn coming back to where it was when you were born. But a Saturn transit is different from Saturn natally placed. Okay, a Saturn transit, as I said before, is where is it in the sky right now? Okay, Saturn natally placed is what you have naturally in your chart. So your chart has a natural Saturn and Aries temperament, a natural Saturn and Aries behavior pattern. So with Neptune dissolving that energy, and Neptune does dissolve, think of the ocean and crashing on the shore and rolling back into itself, and it's lovely. But what's going on in the bigger picture is that those waves crashing on the shore are shaping the shore. They're shaping the continent. They're shaping the landmass. Okay, so this takes place over a long period of time. So, but Neptune has a tendency to dissolve as you feel the dissolution or the loss of things that you believed in. That could potentially lead you to double down on the things that did work for you or that you believed work. And so there can be what we call an overcompensation reaction, overcompensating reaction here, where it's like, I'm feeling lost, bewildered, confused, and I'm going to double down. I'm going to double down on these things that I really believe. And Saturn at the same time is saying, you've outgrown these things that you've believed and you need to put them to one side. So that could be an internal struggle. But the struggle is a good struggle because it's about deepening and it's about growing and it's about maturing. So whether you're kind of like, I'm bewildered and lost, or you're doubling down on the things I used to believe, or whether you're like, I guess I'm in a process, the more that you can be open to that process and to let the planets lead you through unfamiliar territory, the more you have to gain. Because the point of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction is to deepen. It is to make more profound. It is to make wise, but not a wisdom in terms of acquired experience, but wisdom in terms of connecting to yourself on a deeper and more soulful level. Mr. Cosmos, can we have question number 4? At Pretty Baby 3, Cap Rising here. Okay, Jupiter in Aries, Saturn. Oh, Jupiter in Aries, right? That's a fire sign. Saturn in Leo, that's a fire sign. Neptune and Sun in Sagittarius, that's a third fire sign. Okay, so this person's got one planet in each of the 3 fire signs, which creates a loose trine. The Neptune-Saturn conjunction will make a trine, okay, to my 8th and 12th houses. What would you say about this? The 8th and 12th houses, along with the 4th, but I think the 8th and 12th houses are probably the most complex of all the astrological houses, simply because they deal so much with mystery, with things that are beyond our control, with very powerful soulful experiences or deep psychological, what we would call psychological experiences, where it's not easy to articulate, where there aren't rules, where we can lose our way. The 12th house is a house that, as I referred to before, could be associated to self-undoing, which we would translate nowadays to maybe self-sabotaging patterns, but it's also the house of intergenerational. Basically, it's like an intergenerational disposition or an intergenerational soul. Sometimes people talk about it as an intergenerational curse, and I'm not ruling that one out, but it's stuff that has come before in the previous generations. I kind of call it the epigenetics house, because usually there's some sort of ordeal or trouble or difficulty in the past. And, even though you might not have experienced what your ancestors have, and this is really an ancestral house along with the 4th, you might not experience what your ancestors did, but it set a tone. Okay, it set a theme, and it's come down through the generations. An easier way to think of it is probably the closet full of the family skeletons. That's going to be 12th house. 8th house is more dealing with those areas of life that are a little bit what we would call notorious. All right. I mean, it's the house of sex, death, and other people's money. Okay. So it's a house in which we can feel beholden to, if you have Sun in the 8th house, you might feel beholden to someone financially or sexually, or, like the other person has all the power, or it might be what the other person in your life, maybe it's a spouse, a partner, a close friend, is bringing to the relationship. And it might be the turmoils and struggles that they face. But the 8th house is nevertheless a transformative house. But transformation in astrology is gauged by the ordeals you go through. You just don't like, I'm transformed. You go through an ordeal. You go through something very difficult where you've suffered. And do you give into that suffering? Do you identify with that suffering? Or do you try to find your way through that suffering, to rescue your own soul, who you are as a person? So these are very, as you can tell, deep topics. What happens with the Saturn and the Neptune conjunction is the Saturn and the Neptune conjunction might be debunking some of these things that you've told yourself. Okay, maybe you said to yourself, there's intergenerational crap in my family and I'm helpless to change it. The Saturn and Neptune conjunction is going to say, no, you can change it. Okay, it's the dissolving of the illusion, but it's also the Aries. It's like, hey, Aries is Mars ruled. Don't just accept that. Get back on your feet. You can change that. So that might be part of it. Or in the 8th house, maybe you felt victimized or abused. Maybe you were maybe you were victimized, maybe you were abused. And does that scar you for life? Does that define you as a person? That's part of the trauma of being traumatized. Is this going to always be triggering? Is this always going to be defining myself as a person? And so that is another disillusion of a belief. And are you ready to let go of that? Or are you like, no, I've been hurt and I need revenge, and that's really important. So hopefully you can see from what I'm intimating how complex these issues can be. What's wonderful about a trine and fire is that, imagine being in the dark and someone turned on a light. That's fire. Okay. Fire gives us the ability to see and to understand in an experiential and spiritual way. So this could be a very profound time for you, where you're facing some dark aspects of your past or even of your own person. And think of it as wood. You're sort of taking these dark aspects of your past or yourself as a person, and you're taking this wood and you're putting it in a pile, and now you're going to light it up. Okay, you're going to burn it. You're going to purge. You're getting rid of it. It's going up in flame. And of course, spirit is connected to fire, and this is very illuminating. And as a result of this illuminating experience, you might find yourself transforming on a very deep and a very powerful level. Okay, now I think we're ready for the last one, Mr. Cosmos. Because Aries is in my 9th house, how will Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries affect me? Basically, the way that Saturn conjunct Aries in the 9th house is going to affect you is that you're going to receive, during this period of time, you're probably already feeling it, a calling card from your higher purpose. All right. The 9th house is so much associated with higher purpose. Many of us want to live a purpose-driven life, but transits in the 9th house, or people with planets in the 9th house, is about that higher purpose and embodying that purpose. But here, with the transit going through the 9th house, it's a calling. Okay, you're being called forth from your life. Now, that doesn't mean like, I'm leaving my obligations behind, sell my things, I'm off to Tibet. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that you may feel like something is tugging at you, something is calling. It might begin as an emptiness. It might begin, many spiritual callings begin as an emptiness, like my life feels empty, like I wish I had a higher purpose. And then this will be like a calling, but it's not going to appear like a burning bush. It's going to be, because Neptune rules the invisible world, it's going to be this tug. It's going to be this feeling of responding to something. But again, because of its Neptunian nature, it's hard to articulate. It's hard to describe. You just know that you're being called to something. And so you might keep that private. But because it's the nature of the 9th house in Aries there, you might like share with friends. Okay, like I have a calling, and that would be wonderful. In fact, your friends might be like, maybe we can go along with you, but it's going to be this calling to something bigger and better in your life. And it may start vague, and then it's going to take on contours. It will take on a shape, and it might strike you as being too overwhelming. What's being asked is too much. You don't know how to respond to it. And this is what's wonderful about slow moving planets. Take your time responding to it. These aren't fast moving planets. You're not going to have this calling and then you've got 20 minutes to respond. It's this sense of calling, and then just be with that calling and then let it shape, let it emerge, let it materialize, let it speak to you. Will you be leaving behind certain things in your life, situations, ideas, beliefs, philosophies that you've held? Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point. But at the same time, it's not going to be something that's so, it's not going to wipe out who you are as a person. You're not going to be like, I'm shaving my head and, now you can call me Lou or something like that, from the planet, whatever. It's not going to be anything like that, but it's going to be this wonderful experience, something that calls to you, something that you're like, I'm not sure if I can respond. And part of the journey to responding is, how do you respond? What is it going to ask you to give up in terms of beliefs or values or commitments as you respond to this, and you begin to recognize how it is infusing your life from top to bottom with inspiration. Okay, I want to thank all of you for joining us for the live stream today. I want to thank all of you for sending in questions. And I want to make a point that the solar eclipse video will be, do we say dropping? Will be uploading, okay, on February 17th. And then we have a live stream on February 21st, which is open to the members of the Christopher Renstrom Salon, where you can send in your questions just like you did today. And I will be more than happy to answer them. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me for this live, and I'll see you later. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode exclusively for subscribers to the Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon. I'm so grateful that you could join. Until next time, take good care, and thank you again for being a part of Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon.